Jonathan Reed had strolled past that alley 100 times before, always with purpose, polished shoes clicking confidently on the pavement, mind already racing ahead to meetings, mergers, and markets. But today, everything was different. Today, the world moved slower. The click of his shoes was joined by the quiet creak of small rubber wheels. His daughter, Emily, sat bundled in her wheelchair, legs motionless beneath a soft blue knit blanket, her golden hair falling like silk curtains over her pale cheeks. She didn't speak. She didn't even look up. Her gaze remained fixed on the sidewalk, as if she had buried her hopes in the cracks between the concrete. Jonathan's hand gripped the wheelchair handle tighter than necessary. It wasn't anger. It was helplessness wearing a suit. 2 years had passed since the accident. 2 long years filled with surgeries, therapies, hospitals across oceans, and specialists who wore smiles that never reached their eyes. Permanent spinal damage, they all had said with solemn voices and gentle shrugs. She may live a full life, but she will never walk again. Jonathan had bought miracles, or so he thought. He paid for energy healers, hypnotherapists, herbalists flown in from countries he could barely pronounce. Each time, hope would rise like a wave, only to crash into the same shore of despair. And now, walking past this alley for the 100th time, he wasn't sure what he was looking for anymore. Closure? A sign? Redemption? Silence pressed in on him like fog, thick and damp, impossible to escape. Emily shifted slightly but said nothing. Somewhere deep inside, Jonathan still clung to belief, frayed, weathered, but alive. He wouldn't let go. Not yet. Not until every last path had been walked. But this alley, this moment, felt different, charged, like the air before lightning strikes. Then from the shadows came a voice. Young, clear, steady. Mister, it said, I know how to make your daughter walk again. Jonathan froze. The words hung in the air like a thread pulled tight, fragile yet impossible to ignore. Slowly, he turned toward the alley's mouth, expecting. What exactly? A con, a prank, another cruel joke the world liked to play on men who dared to hope. But what he saw instead made him blink. A boy, no older than Emily, stood half shrouded in shadow, barefoot on cracked concrete, a tattered army coat swallowing his thin frame. His skin was the deep brown of sun-baked earth, his hair a mess of tight coils, and one eye bore the faint shadow of a healing bruise. But it wasn't the bruises or the dirt that held Jonathan's gaze. It was the boy's voice, steady, sure, as if he were delivering a truth carved from stone. What did you just say? Jonathan asked, his tone caught between suspicion and disbelief. I said, the boy repeated, stepping forward into the light, I can help your daughter walk again. The audacity of the statement punched through the tension like a drumbeat. Jonathan stiffened. Is this a game? Who sent you? The boy shook his head slowly. No one. My name's Jaden. I live near the train station. I saw you pushing her yesterday. I waited here because I knew you'd come back. Emily stirred in her seat for the first time, her head tilting ever so slightly toward the voice. Jaden noticed. She looked sad, he said gently, like someone who used to run fast but forgot how. Jonathan's heart thudded once, hard. That simple sentence held more truth than all the white-coated experts he'd paid fortunes to see. I've taken her to every top hospital, he snapped, defending himself from the impossible. Neurologists, surgeons, healers, there's nothing left to try. Jaden shrugged. Except my grandmother. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. You're what, 8? 9 next month, Jaden said. She doesn't take money, so just trust. Emily's voice, soft and trembling, floated up like mist. Daddy, can we go? Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. It had been days, no weeks, since Emily last spoke more than a whisper. Her voice now, though faint, cut through the air like sunlight through fog. He dropped to one knee beside her, searching her face, as if making sure it wasn't just some trick of his exhausted mind. Her eyes met his, still guarded, still uncertain. But behind the mist of sadness, something flickered. A spark. Can we go? She asked again, quieter this time, almost afraid he'd say no. Jonathan's heart ached. The words absolutely not were already marching toward his lips like soldiers, trained, rational, protective. But they stalled at the edge of his tongue. Because he remembered. He remembered the night she cried herself to sleep, curled in his arms, whispering between broken sobs, I hate being like this, like I'm not real anymore. And he had no answer, only silence. Only a helpless grip on her tiny shoulders as the world offered nothing but polite condolences and impossible finality. He turned back to Jaden, this barefoot stranger with dirt on his cheeks and a voice full of conviction no child his age should carry. "If anything feels off," Jonathan said, looking into his daughter's eyes, "we leave. Immediately. No questions." Emily nodded, clutching the edge of her blanket tighter. Jaden smiled, not wide or smug, but soft and knowing. Then, without another word, he turned and walked, his coat trailing behind like a banner in slow wind. Jonathan hesitated only a second before pushing the wheelchair forward, wheels creaking in the silence that followed them. For a moment, it felt like stepping off a cliff with nothing beneath. But then Emily leaned back in her seat, not with fear, but something almost like calm. And for the first time in 2 years, Jonathan followed someone not with power, not with logic, but with faith. The city faded behind them like a forgotten dream. Jaden led the way through narrow back streets where concrete gave way to broken fences and graffiti-stained walls whispered stories in color. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across cracked pavement. Emily clutched the sides of her wheelchair each time a bump jolted her fragile frame, but she didn't complain. Her eyes were wide, alert, scanning the path ahead with a kind of wonder that Jonathan hadn't seen since before the accident. He walked close behind her, his hand firm on the wheelchair, his mind battling every instinct, screaming to turn back. They passed rusted cars swallowed by weeds, chain-link fences sagging with age, and alleys littered with forgotten things. Twice, Jonathan paused, looked around, almost called it off. But each time he did, Jaden glanced back over his shoulder. Not pleading, not explaining, just offering a gaze that said, "Trust me." There was something ancient in that child's calm, something that made even a man like Jonathan, used to boardrooms, contracts, and bulletproof logic, hesitate. The city noise thinned until it vanished, replaced by the distant huff of wind through dry leaves. Finally, the broken asphalt turned to dirt, and then the dirt narrowed into a trail barely wide enough for the wheelchair to pass. It twisted through thickets of wild brush and bramble, where birds scattered from the branches above. Emily winced at every jolt, but her grip never loosened. Then, without warning, the trail opened like a secret clearing, and there it stood. A cabin, crooked and weathered, stitched together with moss and timber. It looked too old to stand and too magical to fall. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. Wind chimes made of bone and glass swayed gently in the breeze. Jonathan stopped. "This is it?" he asked, his voice low. Jaden didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning toward the cabin. And just then, the door creaked open, revealing a figure with silver hair flowing down her shoulders like river water, eyes the color of emerald fire. Grandma May was waiting. She stepped onto the porch like the wind had summoned her, bare feet soundless on the worn wooden boards, her long silver hair braided with bits of bark, thread, and feathers that swayed with each movement. Her presence quieted the world around them. Even the trees seemed to lean in. Jonathan stared, unsure whether to feel skeptical or reverent. Her eyes, impossibly green, locked onto Emily first, not pitying, not clinical, just seeing. Then she turned to Jaden and nodded, as if they were continuing a conversation only they could hear. "I was wondering when you'd bring them," she said softly, her voice a mixture of rustling leaves and firelight. Jaden gave a small nod. "He didn't believe," he murmured, "but she did." Emily managed a faint smile. The woman descended the steps and knelt slowly in front of the wheelchair, her movements deliberate, as though honoring a ritual. "Child," she said gently, "may I touch your knees?" Emily's gaze darted to her father, her small fingers tightening on the blanket. Jonathan hesitated. His world had always demanded credentials, referrals, proof. But there was no stethoscope here, no clipboard, just a hush that made doubt feel loud. He gave a small nod. The woman placed her hands lightly over Emily's knees, her palms weathered but warm. Her eyes fluttered closed, and she began to hum, low, deep, and ancient. The sound wasn't a melody so much as a memory, like the earth itself singing. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Emily flinched. "I felt that," she whispered, eyes wide. Jonathan lurched forward. "Felt what?" "A tingle in my toes." The woman opened her eyes slowly. "Her spine isn't dead," she said. "It's grieving. Frozen in fear, but the body listens to more than the brain." Jonathan shook his head. "That's not medicine," the woman smiled faintly. "No, but medicine doesn't cradle her when she cries at night." Behind her, Jaden stood silent, hands folded, watching with the solemn stillness of someone who had seen this before. Emily's lips parted, trembling. Her eyes, once dulled by months of disappointment, now shimmered with something fragile and luminous. "I felt my foot," she whispered again, as though saying it too loudly might chase the sensation away. Jonathan dropped to his knees beside her, disbelief fighting to surface but drowned beneath the tidal wave of emotion rising in his chest. "Tell me exactly," he said, voice hoarse. "What did it feel like?" Emily blinked. "Like pins or tiny sparks." She looked down at her legs as if seeing them for the first time in years. The old woman, Grandma May, slowly rose to her feet, brushing her hands together softly as though shedding dust from another world. "The nerves aren't gone," she said. "They've just forgotten how to speak. Sometimes, when pain lives too long in silence, it binds the body like frost on branches." Jonathan looked up at her, jaw clenched. "You make it sound so simple." She shook her head. "No, it's never simple, but it is true. The body listens to the heart more than science dares admit." Emily shifted again, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Her breath came faster now, not from fear, but anticipation. She leaned forward, her fingers twitching slightly. "Can I try?" she asked, her voice both timid and resolute. "Only if you want to," Grandma May replied. "Not for me, not for him, for you." Emily nodded. The woman gently rolled the wheelchair back and extended both hands. Emily grasped them, her small fingers clutching tightly as she braced herself. Slowly, shakily, she pushed upward. Jonathan instinctively surged forward, ready to catch her. But Grandma May lifted one hand in quiet command. "Wait." Emily's knees wobbled, her feet unsure, but she stood, wobbling like a newborn foal finding the earth beneath it. Her arms quivered, but her eyes were blazing. "Daddy," she whispered, voice cracking with awe. "I'm standing." And Jonathan, mighty Jonathan Reed, sank to the ground, unable to speak, his soul split wide open. She stood there, trembling like a flame caught in wind, but she stood. Her feet, bare against the cool wooden floor, shifted uncertainly beneath her, the muscles rediscovering commands they hadn't obeyed in 2 long years. Jonathan couldn't move. He was frozen between fear and reverence, watching his daughter become something more than the fragile girl wrapped in blankets. Emily took a breath, then another. Her arms hovered for balance, fingers spread like wings not yet sure of flight. Then, with a tiny exhale, she stepped forward. One foot dragged slightly, but it moved. Then the next. The distance between her and Jonathan was barely a few feet, but to her it was a mountain, and she was climbing it. Jonathan's heart pounded. He wanted to rush to her, to scoop her up and never let her legs touch the ground again. But something in her eyes told him not to. Pride, fierce and trembling, burned there. She took a second step, then a third. Her body swayed, her knees buckled, and she fell. Jonathan lunged, arms outstretched, catching her just before she hit the floor. She collapsed into him, sobbing, not from pain, but from wonder. "I felt them," she cried into his shoulder, her voice muffled by tears. "Daddy, I really felt them." He held her as if she were made of light and glass. "You did, baby," he whispered, choking on his own words. "You did." Behind them, Grandma May stood silently, her hands folded as though she'd seen this moment many times before. There was no triumph in her posture, no theatrics, only peace. Jaden crouched nearby, watching without a smile, without a word. He didn't need to speak. Everything that mattered was already unfolding in the space between their breaths. And in that sacred stillness, something invisible shifted in the air. The soundless crack of an old world breaking, and a new one quietly being born. Jonathan turned to Jaden, his arms still wrapped protectively around Emily, whose tears soaked through his shirt. His voice came out in a hush, heavy with wonder and disbelief. "How did you know? How did you do that?" Jaden didn't answer right away. He looked down, fingers tracing idle circles in the dirt, as if searching for words in the soil. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. "I just remembered." Jonathan furrowed his brow. "Remembered what?" Jaden's eyes lifted, and for the first time, Jonathan saw the weight he carried. Older than his years, deeper than any wound. "My grandma," he said. "She wasn't a doctor, but she understood people. Not just bodies, people. She knew how they breathe when they're broken, how they fall apart in silence. She always said, not all pain lives in the bones. Some of it hides where x-rays can't find it." Jonathan sat back, stunned. Jaden's voice didn't waver, but something inside it quaked with memory. "I was born with a twisted foot, walked funny. Kids laughed. My mom left when I was 4. Grandma raised me. One day she sat me down, put her hand on my foot, and whispered in a language I didn't understand. Then she said, "Stand up." So I did, and I never fell again. Emily, still leaning against her father's chest, turned her head to look at Jaden. Her eyes were wide, searching. "She healed you?" Jaden shook his head slowly. "She reminded me I wasn't broken." The fire crackled from inside the cabin, casting long shadows across the clearing. Grandma May stood nearby, watching them with the quiet satisfaction of a gardener watching a bud finally bloom. Jonathan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Where is she now?" Jaden's gaze fell. "Gone. A year ago. They tried to put me in the system, said I was making it all up, said she was a fraud. So I ran. I help people now. Not everyone, just the ones who ask, the ones who believe." Jonathan rose slowly, brushing dust from his knees, and turned to face Grandma May. His expression was no longer one of doubt, but reverence, the kind a man wears when standing before something he once called impossible. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. She smiled, lines folding gently around her mouth like creases in old silk. "Just someone who listens," she said, her eyes flicking toward Jaden. "He does the rest." Jonathan turned to the boy, studying him not as a child, but as something else entirely, an old soul wrapped in young skin. "This isn't just healing," he said. "This is something bigger." Jaden didn't reply. He didn't need to. The proof sat breathing against Jonathan's chest, her heart pounding, her legs no longer strangers. "Come with us," Jonathan said suddenly. The words spilled from him like a rush of wind. "I can help you. Doctors, school, a future. You deserve more than this." Jaden looked up, and for a second, something flickered in his eyes. Temptation, maybe. A longing. But then he shook his head gently. "My place is out there," he said, gesturing toward the darkness beyond the trail. "In the corners, people forget. That's where the hurt hides. That's where I'm needed." Jonathan's throat tightened. "What if I still want to help you?" Jaden shrugged. "You already did." He reached into his oversized coat and pulled it tighter. Jonathan hesitated, then fished a card from his inner pocket. Creased, damp from his hands, but still legible. "This is my direct line," he said. "Day or night. If you ever need anything, food, shelter, school, you call." Jaden took the card and studied it with quiet care before folding it precisely and tucking it into the lining of his coat like a sacred thing. Emily turned and looked at him, voice soft. "Will I see you again?" Jaden smiled, that gentle, haunted smile. "If you ever forget how to believe," he said, "I'll probably be nearby." A week later, the schoolyard buzzed with whispers and wide eyes as Emily Reed stood at the edge of the auditorium stage, her small hands steadying her against the podium. No wheelchair, no braces. Only her. Taller now, not in height, but in presence, as though standing had ignited something buried deep within. A hush fell over the crowd of students, teachers, and parents as she took her first step across the stage. Then another. Slow, careful, but hers. Every footfall echoed like thunder in the silence. Camera flashes sparked. A teacher wiped away a tear. Somewhere in the back, a reporter leaned forward, eyes wide. When Emily reached the microphone, she paused, catching her breath, her voice small but clear. "People ask me what changed," she said. "How I'm walking again." She looked out over the sea of faces, then smiled. "A boy believed I could." That was all. She stepped back and walked off the stage to the sound of stunned applause that started slow and swelled like a rising tide. Across town, in an alley 3 districts away, Jaden sat cross-legged on the cold concrete beside a girl no older than Emily. She hadn't spoken in weeks, her voice lost after something unspeakable had cracked her open from the inside. Jaden didn't ask questions. He didn't offer food or solutions. He just sat with her, humming softly, an old melody once sung by hands that smelled like herbs and wood smoke. The girl didn't react at first, but after a while, her breathing slowed. Her fingers, curled tight around the hem of her jacket, began to relax. Jaden kept humming, his eyes on the sky above the alley's jagged rim, where a thin strip of light split the gray. Healing didn't always roar like a miracle. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it sat beside you in silence and waited. And sometimes it arrived barefoot, with dirt on its hands and a voice that simply refused to walk away.